I think one of the biggest challenges within disaster recovery is like I said at the outset, it's best practices. I mean, one of the things about Sarbanes-Oxley, which is a real, it's good and it's bad, is at the end of the day, Sarbanes-Oxley, you are held to a higher authority, and that higher authority is the external audit team itself. Mm-hmm. From that perspective, they make you or force you, in a sense, to follow, best IT practices. We mentioned at the outset backups. We all know that backups need to be done. We all know that you need to, in turn, put that onto tape or into the cloud and move that offsite. But at the end of the day, you need to be able to test that. I've had several scenarios where we've actually recalled, for example, at Shutterfly, we had tape libraries that were well over 50,000 LCO tapes, and we've had to bring those tapes back in on a variety of different reasons to recover. And there's been times where we brought that tape back in, we've realized that tape didn't work. We thought that it was fine. We thought everything was good. We shipped that tape off, and then we brought that tape back in. We realized that at that point in time, it wasn't working. So that's when we started working with disaster recovery and Sarbanes-Oxley and Shutterfly. We started to actually test the tapes before we sent them off-site, validate that you could actually get these things to do what they're supposed to do in the moment of crisis. When we look at networking connections, for example, we do quarterly tests down here at Zetter where we in turn will take one of our primary network feeds into the building and we will, in a sense, unplug it to validate that it will fail over to the secondary box. Now, a lot of IT guys have, it's one of two camps, if you will. One, don't want to test environment or don't want to test their infrastructure because they're worried about bringing down the actual customer base. And the second side of things, at least my philosophy, is you need to test this because you need to know how it's going to work in the moment of crisis. One classic example that I have of where somebody decided not to do testing was back some years ago when I was at Lycos. We in turn had a data center on the West Coast. Lycos itself had a search engine that in turn was split between West Coast and the East Coast. What I did, I got a call 3 o'clock in the morning, went down to the data center. What we found is we had lost power in California. In Silicon Valley. What we found then is that the environmentals, i.e. the generator and everything, it kicked off at the data center, and so we had plenty of power, but what they didn't realize is that nobody had bothered to actually hook up the HVAC units to the generator. The data center manager at that point in time didn't want to test the environmentals with customers in there. He felt that everything would work fine, but at the end of the day, what we found is by the time the disaster had actually happened, we found a situation where they had no air conditioning inside the data center. Within a very short period of time, we had a situation where the data center itself was coming up to 100 degrees, and we were getting ready to basically take Lycos' infrastructure and flip it over to the East Coast when power came back on. But there's an example where somebody decided not to do the testing. If they had done that testing in a controlled environment, they would have been able to figure out that the HVAC was not hooked up to the generators. So once again, if you don't do your testing out there, it's going to lead to significant downtime. One of the other things that just is it's caused me some problems in the past is you have an awful lot of documentation at your fingertips as far as your environment. Make sure you've got that documentation stored somewhere else. I mean, if it's on a thumb drive, if it's in what we used to call in the old days a run book, I mean, make sure you've got your contact information, your circuit ID numbers, your vendor information. Have that somewhere else, because if your network goes down in your office and you can't get to that data, you've just made a problem that's bad and you've made it even worse.